It's my pleasure to introduce Steve Salisbury. He's passionate about working with executives to close the strategy to execution gap. For dozens of major clients, he evaluates interpersonal, organizational, and process elements to eliminate cross-functional dysfunction and builds teams to create a leadership culture to drive all types of change. While studies show that strategy execution continues to underperform, Steve has a remarkable 85% success rate. Having studied a little strategy in organizations over the years, that's quite an impressive statistic. Steve also serves as immediate past president of the Midwest chapter of Association of Change Management Professionals. Purpose of this organization is to develop change professionals who provide substantial value and expertise to the organizations they serve through creativity, passions, and excellence. Finally, Steve spent most of his adult life in southwestern Michigan and now lives with his wife in Chicago. He still owns a southwestern Michigan family vineyard that his parents bought in the 1960s. With that, Steve, please take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Norm. And thanks for that introduction. Good morning, everybody. It's really great to be with you finally after the challenges we had last night. I tend to have a lot of opportunities to speak with PMI audiences, and I just really appreciate what you do and what you bring to the table. I think there's a mutual respect between what we do in the change field and what you do in project management. And today, I'm very honored to be with you and to share with you one of my proudest accomplishments and probably the largest initiative I've ever been involved with. We're going to start this morning with a couple of fun polls just to get the blood flowing. So we'll start with this one. In what country is the world's largest washing machine manufacturing plant? In what country is the world's largest washing machine manufacturing plant?
All right. I know, Lynn, did you display that poll? I haven't seen it yet.
Over in your communication area on the right-hand side next to the chat button, also where people can go to QA, there should be polls.
Right, got it.
You pull under, there should be a poll there. There should actually be two. I posted
okay, I'm just seeing the second one, so I just hit create poll.
Nope. Everybody scroll down. It posts it in the order that I enter them in, and then posts the new one at the top. I apologize. I did not know it did that, but
okay. Let's go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
I'll hit create poll.
Oh no, it should be there.
Oh, okay. All right. Go ahead, folks, and go at it. I will go ahead and put in the third one then.
Okay. I will.
Unless you are you going to stay with us, Lynn?
Yeah, I'll stay with that.
Okay.
Do you want me
if you want to go ahead and put in the poll, I'd sure appreciate it.
I will.
Thank you. All right, seeing some of the results here. United States has 20 votes, Mexico 14, Germany 4, Korea 5, China 5. For question number one, in what country in the world is the largest washing manufacturing plant?
Okay, cool. Good answers, smart people. But I'm not going to reveal the answer yet because we got to do the second poll. If I told you the answer to the first poll, you'd get the second one. So let's go to the second one.
Okay. The top vote getter is Ohio.
Yep.
About 60%. The other ones, I think I would just butcher all three names here. Nuevo Leon had 2 votes.
Okay, well let's just move ahead. So y'all are very smart people. The correct answer is Ohio in the United States. Still, it's kind of hard to believe given everything that we do globally these days in manufacturing. But the Whirlpool-owned washing machine plant in Clyde, Ohio, and Clyde's about halfway between Toledo and Cleveland, out in the middle of Corn Country, Ohio. That is the world's largest washing machine manufacturing plant. Okay, one last question for fun is, how big is it? How big is that plant? And this is in square feet. And just for reference, and I know I don't want to stereotype anybody, but you're all central Illinois, central Indiana, central Iowa. So you're probably related, you can probably relate to farming analogies. 2,000 or 2 million square feet is about 40 acres, just to give you a perspective. So how large is that plant?
Oh, the votes we got in is 1,250,000 to 2 million. It was about 60%, with greater than 2 million second place with 36%. So that counts for most of it.
Yeah, well, again, you all are right. The plant in Clyde, Ohio is 1.5 million square feet, which is about 35 acres ish. So, you know, that's a big piece of land. So yeah, big plant. And just another statistic that you might be interested in, that factory pumps out anywhere between 3 and 4 million washing machines every year. And it's just phenomenal what happened there. So, all right, well, let's get into the meat of this. So why are we having this conversation? Why did Whirlpool want to buy Maytag in the first place? Well, I think it boiled down to a few things. Number one, they wanted to give consumers, the leaders of Whirlpool wanted to give consumers a broader choice of brands of appliances. I should say we, at the time I was employed there, we had decades of consumer insight, consumer information. We were making great progress along the innovation channel, if you will. And we were applying that to the brands that we had at the time. And the brands that Whirlpool had before Maytag were about half of the ones on this screen. Whirlpool, KitchenAid, Balknet in Europe, Brastemp in South America, Brazil, Gladiator, which is the garage, kind of garage furnishings, if you will. And we had, you know, decades of experience that we wanted to apply. And I think the other thing, candidly, was that Maytag was in trouble. This was like 2004, 2005, and the writing was on the wall that if somebody didn't pick them up, they were going to go bankrupt, and the world would lose some really great brands. I'm sure that there are many of you in the audience that remember the good old Maytag repairman, right? Well, we would have lost all of that. And, you know, and it's in kind of maybe altruistic way, Whirlpool wanted to be the largest manufacturer of major home appliances on the planet. And so we achieved that. So an interesting story. So let's get right into the integration. And this was the integration master plan, if you will. And the entire integration consisted of these 7 programs, if you will, that took place over about 2.5, almost 3 years. Today, we're going to really focus on the appliance sales and distribution integration. This, candidly, was probably bigger than the other 6 all put together in terms of scale and scope, because what this was all about was moving the $4 billion, that's billion with a B, moving the $4 billion of Maytag business into Whirlpool's operating environment. And at the time, Maytag was on some legacy order management distribution systems. Whirlpool had SAP. So we were moving all of that from legacy into Whirlpool's SAP. So big project, and you know, big project that took a lot of focus. And in fact, it was the #1 priority for the company for this period. Well, how did it go? What made it successful? When I reflect on this project and what we did, we had 3 very important ingredients from my perspective. And as I've worked with other clients since this took place, my clients tell me that, yeah, these are 3 really important components that cross-functional projects really need to be focused on. And this trifecta, if you will, was really the foundation of success for this project. 3 key elements: a structured PMO. We'll talk about each of these, by the way. Structured PMO, a structured change management office, and then work to really integrate the organization cross-functionally. In the case of this program to consolidate the business, it involved a lot of functions, starting with sales, order management, distribution, warehousing, transportation, planning, accounts receivable, finance, some procurement, some manufacturing. We're all in this big project that took place through the year 2006. So having an approach to really think about how this was going to work cross-functionally in the new environment was really important. All right, we're going to talk about each of these 3 legs of the trifecta and move into talking about the structured PMO, starting with another poll. How critical? Yeah, go ahead, Norm.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just for the folks in the audience, they can click on polls there and enter their answer. I'm sorry, Steve. Go ahead.
No problem. So this is kind of open-ended and probably a little bit of a gimme, right? But how critical is the success? How critical to the success of a project is a structured PMO? What do you think?
The results we got here are critical is over 40%, and absolutely necessary is almost 37%.
I would expect that, especially from this audience, right?
That's a gimme.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about what we did, and let's talk a little bit about what happens when you don't have a structured PMO. And you all could probably give this part of the presentation better than I. But without some sort of structure around your project management office, you're going to have false starts and scope creep. People are going to be confused on direction and timing and timelines. It's like herding cats. And from a people perspective, which is what I look at, it really ends up with lack of engagement and a lot of frustration and lack of ownership, which is ultimately critical for the success of the initiative. So very important to have that structured PMO. This is what we implemented for the business integration project that we're talking about today. And I know there's quite a bit on this chart. Let me walk through it at least at a high level to kind of lay it out for you. And I'm going to start at the bottom, because the bottom is where the action really happens, right? This is the frontline employees. This is the front line. And so the functional project teams, you might recall that I mentioned we had sales and order management, accounts receivable, planning, distribution, et cetera, et cetera. Each of those functions had their own project team, if you will. And the project team included, there was a business project lead, there was an IT lead, there were obviously project team members from the function, and then there was a change agent assigned to each of the functions. And we'll talk more about the change role in the next segment. But those people basically dotted line reported to me. change agents at the functional level. The next box up is the Business and Systems Integration Program Management Team, a mouthful, but this was the really the project integration team. Project, I won't say steering committee because that's the third box up, but this is the group, and we met every week. This is the group that really drove the progress of the project. It was headed by the Vice President of Business and Systems Integration, the box over on the left, the medium blue box over to the left. This gentleman was borrowed from his permanent role as the Chief Financial Officer for Whirlpool's North America region, which, you know, was the largest region that we had at the time. And other people involved in that at that level was a vice president of integration from IT. Each of the functional leads that led the teams in the first box at the bottom, they participated in this meeting, as well as did the functional head. So like the VP of supply chain or the VP of finance or the VP of procurement participated in this meeting, and I was in there as well. And again, we met every week to talk about where we were with the project, where we were with issue resolution and risk mitigation, and how we were tracking on progress. And we'll talk more about those things in a minute. The next level up was the Maytag Integration Steering Committee. This included basically the North American leadership team and both the vice president of the integration project, the CFO, who we moved into that role, as well as the overall VP of the integration effort. And they met every other week to talk about progress, status, remove roadblocks, resolve issues, mitigate risks, and that sort of thing. And then at the top, we have the executive steering team, which included the CEO of the company and most of the people that were down at that second level. And they met monthly to talk about progress and status and issues and risks and so on and so forth. One thing I wanted to point out about this is that Whirlpool was and is a global company. We have operations in every country, well, on every continent, I should say, except Africa. And we have sales offices in Africa. We have manufacturing presence in the major continents. Maytag was really just a US-based company. So this initiative was really North America focused. Maytag really didn't have any presence anywhere else on the planet. So it was really North America and really the United States. So that's why you see a very North American sense to this slide. From a planning perspective, and this is a very high level view, but we had a very detailed work plan. We actually started planning even before the Department of Justice approved the merger, and that was in March of 2006. We started planning like in September of 2005. This chart really talks about the last few weeks leading up to the go live in October of 2006. And I think the point here is that we had really three major work streams, if you will, that the project integration team, that second level up from the bottom of the previous slide, that they really focused on. And of course, number one was the functional project team and their work plans. And again, this was the weeks leading up to go live, making sure testing was complete and that we were ready, right? And completing SOX documentation. This was long after all the process changes had been made and modifications to applications and that sort of thing. Another work stream that the project integration team really focused on was the cross-functional activities. and we'll talk more about this later, but we did multiple cross-functional project reviews, business process reviews, impact reviews, cutover plan reviews that included everybody across the organization to make sure that we were all aligned and that we knew what was happening in one area and how it might impact folks in other areas, other functions. And then the third, it's not really a work stream, but it was certainly a focus, were the key decision points that the team was responsible for along the way, right? Making sure that decisions were made, go, no-go decisions were articulated and rigorous, and ultimately giving the final, thumbs up that, hey, we can go with this. So, so again, high-level chart, but let me share with you something that will make your eyes bend. And by the way, you're going to receive these slides, and you can take a look at these in more detail. But this is the kind of detail that we put together at the project integration team level. So in terms of business readiness, we have the functions down the left side of the chart here. The functional areas are highlighted under the table. Finance, distribution, planning. Home Depot had its own work stream, if you will, big customer, right? And so on. And then each of the checkpoints for business readiness were listed across the top, and I've highlighted those over on the right side of the screen, where we were looking for making sure that key things were done, like a stakeholder analysis. Who's this going to impact? How is it going to impact them? What kind of communication and training do they need? Testing, quality assurance, go live, readiness assessment, SOX documentation, that sort of thing. So we track these every week, I would say religiously for the last probably 8 weeks before go live. And where are we at? And are we gonna make it? And then the other thing we focused on was the go, no-go decision, a little bit different than business readiness. This is, do we have everything in place that we need to go live? Similar chart, functions down the left, go, no-go criteria across the top. Things like, is this business process really going to work? Have we met the requirements to really integrate these two different businesses? Have we completed data migration, provisioning, security? Have we completed training? Is the infrastructure set up to handle this additional capacity? Remember, I don't think I mentioned this, but pre-merger, Whirlpool was about a $12 billion corporation. We were integrating a $4 billion corporation. That's a third more transactions minimally. And so we had to make sure that we had enough infrastructure to support all of that. So those were the factors that we looked at for the go, no-go criteria. And it worked. I don't want to make it a cliffhanger, but this was a very successful project. When we went live, we had just a couple of minor issues, but we went live on October 28th, I believe the date was. And by the 3rd of November, everything was smooth. So and we attributed a lot of that to the detail that went into these sorts of planning charts. And I got to tell you a quick story. It's really funny. To me, it is anyway. I created these templates for this project, and after I left Whirlpool and went into the consulting world, I used these over and over again with other engagements. And some years later, I started working for a client that had the same format. They were using similar tool, same colors and everything. And I thought, how in the heck, where did that come from? Well, it comes to find out, one of their employees was formerly worked for one of my earlier clients, and they saw this and took it with them. So it was kind of cool to see that had resurfaced. So let's see, where are we at? Another poll. So before we go into the poll, I want to pause for a moment here and see if there's any questions about the structured PMO and what we did. Norm, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we do. I've got one here to start. I looked at that slide of, the different management layers and team layers there on slide 10.
Yep.
And I'm just curious, how did the communication work between those layers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it isn't highlighted very well on this slide, but there was overlap in membership, right? So
okay.
The functional team leads at the bottom, the light blue, functional team, team L, team N, they participated in the integration program management team, the box up, right? So there was overlap in their attendance, and they did a lot of the communication, back and forth between those two teams, if you will. And then at the next layer, the function heads were really the North American leadership team. So the VP of supply chain, as an example, sat in the program integration team meeting, but he also sat on the steering committee.
I see. So you had a lot of overlap.
As with the project manager, right? And then that carries up.
One other question we have is, what kind of PMO project team do you have? In other words, was there a small team or a person dedicated just to the scheduling, another for communications, etc.?
Great question. Each of at the bottom here, the light blue functional team leads, each of them were responsible for their own project plan. And they were given something like this chart to really help them make sure that their plans aligned with each of the other functions plans as well as the overall plan, right? And we reviewed these in the program integration team meeting. There was one gentleman who basically drove an integrated project plan for IT, but he really didn't handle the business tasks, if you will, just really the IT.
A few other questions are popping in here. Yeah. How has Samsung impacted Whirlpool's market share?
That's a great question. I don't have a good answer for that right off the top of my head. Happy to look into that a bit. Without getting into the politics of it, you might recall that our former president, wasn't him, but under Trump's presidency, they implemented sanctions against Samsung because they were dumping product over here. And it was that was hurting Whirlpool because, the cost to manufacture in Clyde, Ohio was higher than Korea.
Sure.
But I can't speak to the market share. I can get an answer though.
Okay. Were the team members 100% dedicated to the project effort for the most part?
For the most part, I would say, so the functional leads, the light blue box people at the bottom, they were pretty much taken out of their day-to-day business leadership roles and told, this is, you got to do this. Now, you know how that works. They're not 100% extricated, right. But they were pretty much dedicated. I was probably 90% dedicated. I had a few other responsibilities. The CFO guy, the guy in the sort of medium blue box, VP, B and S integration, he was full-time. We took him completely out of his CFO role and had him lead this. And we had actually a close friend of mine sort of stepped in and was the interim CFO while Ted, that's the guy's name, while Ted was leading this. So kind of a mix.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of a mix.
Last question here for now.
Yep.
You said Home Depot had its own stream.
Yes.
What were those concerns? What were their concerns from a retail perspective?
That's a good question. You know, what I can speak to is that Home Depot was to Maytag what Sears used to be to Whirlpool. And if you know anything about the Sears Whirlpool relationship before, 2000, you know, Sears made up more than half of our distribution. Doesn't anymore, barely. In fact, we severed the relationship a couple of years ago. But so Home Depot is a huge customer of Maytag, and you know how it goes, right? Whenever you have somebody that big, they can sort of dictate, well, this process needs to work this way, and it's probably an anomaly from how you deal with normal business customers, whatever that means. Yeah, and so there were a lot of special little things that Maytag did for Home Depot that we needed to figure out how we were going to deal with.
Okay.
Yep.
That's all the questions for the moment here, Steve. So if you want to continue, that would be great.
Yeah, let's move on. All right, another poll. Let's get over there. So we're going to talk about the second leg of the trifecta, which is the change management office. And the change management office is very focused on people issues. So here's the poll question. What % of project failures are attributed to people issues?
Well, the votes are coming in. The 60 to 70% is gaining, has a lot, but 70 to 80 is taken over. It's about tie now between 60 and 70 and 70 and 80.
Okay. Well, you guys are really smart. There was a study done a couple of years ago by a firm called Benchmarking Partners. And according to their study, 62% of project failures are related to people issues. And we'll talk about some of those as we go through this segment. So what happens when you don't have change management? And again, you all can probably relate to this because you've probably been on projects where there was insufficient change management, right? But the bottom line is what happens is you really don't achieve the value that you want out of a project. And why is that? Well, employees aren't engaged. They aren't clear on what's going on, right? They're not engaged. So how could the solution even be sustainable? And of course, then that leads to implementation issues and delays and that sort of thing. So a structured change management function is really there to really make sure the people are ready to run this thing. Because what happens at the end of the project, that big project structure that we talked about a few minutes ago, that all goes away, right? Ted goes back to his full-time CFO role. Those business leaders go back to focusing on day-to-day operations of their business. Who's left holding the bag? It's the employees, the frontline employees. If they're not appropriately engaged and trained and communicated with, it ain't gonna work. So, period. It just isn't gonna work. So we implemented within the program, we implemented sort of our own change management structure that mirrored or complemented, is probably a better word, complemented what we did from a program management perspective. And this is what it looked like. So I was the change management lead. I was the guy up here in this top left box. And then I had the people in pink, if you will, or whatever color that's showing up on your screen, maybe red. These were the folks on my team. Some of them were direct reports, some of them were virtual. I had a communication lead, I had a training lead, and then we had, because this was so big, I had a project administrative support person that helped me, and I'll share some of her work a little bit later. Then across on the other side, we had change agents assigned to each of the functional areas. And those change agents might have had more than one functional area, depending on scale. I had one person dedicated totally to supply chain, but then I had another person that took on procurement and accounts receivable, and another person that took on sales and distribution. And anyway, so you kind of get the idea. And those change agents worked with each of the business functional leaders across the top over there on the right to really determine how the changes that we needed to implement were going to impact employees. And then use that information to help plan the engagement, the communication, and ultimately the training. So let's see, give me a second. So this process, this structure worked really well. And kind of back to Norm's question earlier, the one he asked about full-time, the people in pink, red, my team, they were all full-time. Some of the others weren't. And some of the others were already there as a result of being in previous roles, right? So like super users and business process advisors, they were already present. We just had to bring in this change structure to help lead through this massive effort. I referenced the change agents working with the business function leads. Oh, sorry, that's different chart, sorry. So we also put in a change process, and we had a change master plan, if you will, that mirrored the program or complemented the program plan. And while the dates aren't shown here, it's really sort of a chronological flow of things that we needed to do from a change management perspective to make sure that we were ready for this project to go live. And so things like making sure we understood what the future state looked like and who the stakeholders were and who the super users were and what we needed to do to prepare them, building a communication plan and a training plan, and then deploying those things. So, and then, we actually led the readiness assessment, and then the post-go live assessment, we led those from a change perspective. I mentioned that the change agents on the right side of that earlier chart worked with each of the function leads to define future state. Well, this is a partial example of what we did in finance. And again, this is an eye chart, but it gives you an idea. What's the current state? What's the transition state? And how is that going to be different next year, 2007, right? And we did this for every function, and the one for finance was probably, I don't remember, 6 or 7 Excel pages long. So, probably 8 of these cascading, if you understand what I'm saying. And we did one of those for every function. And we used that to make sure that we were, especially in the training, making sure that we were putting the training material together correctly. So extremely valuable tool. The timeline, again, complemented the timeline that the program integration team put together, and obviously took place well before we were thinking about go live readiness and go no go decisions. But again, it was basically 4 tracks: discovery and planning, where we tried to figure out who all the players were, what their role was, that previous chart that I showed you, the current state, future state, and then building the plans to support all of that. Developing and executing the training, developing and executing the communication, and then a program feedback along the way. So this basically captures what we did from a change management office perspective. let's see where we are. Oh, so I told you I'd share a couple of reports. Let's see where we are. Yep. So one of the things that my project administrator did is she put together this training status every week for about the last 6 weeks of the project. And this went all the way up to the CEO. And just to give you an idea of magnitude, this was somewhere there's a week, yep, week ending 10/27. This went live 10/28. So this was the last report. And we trained 33,194 employees, 23,332 hours of training in 6 weeks. Just let that sink in. We were busy. But the point of this is not to tell you how big it was. The point of this is to show you the level of detail that we had in reporting that went all the way to the top of the organization. So, we had a lot of visibility for what we're doing. One quick story, mindful of the time here, one quick story is that in early August, we did a pulse survey to kind of see where people were. And we received some less than stellar feedback about the communication that we were doing. And so my communication lead, she was amazing. She took that and she ran with it. She doubled down and she created communications. She did an in-house promotional video. She got in people's faces about communication. And when this thing was over, the CEO actually, I heard feedback from the CEO that said this was the best communicated project that he had ever experienced. So those pulse surveys are really important. What's even more important is that you act on them. So
we're about at 15 minutes left, Steve.
Yeah, so let's move along here. Thank you, Norm. So just why is it important? And I think you get it, right? With a fully staffed, fully engaged change management function or change, even if it's just one person, right? Employees are more engaged. They understand what's changing and how it's going to impact them. They know the details of the implementation. Sponsors are doing what they need to do to drive success. They're visible, they're active, they're communicating, and the change is sustained. It's the point I made earlier, right? The project team all goes away at the end of this. Frontline employees are left running it. So let's, Norm, let's take maybe 2 minutes for some questions and then we'll move on.
Okay, got one popular one here that just came up. And maybe some of this has been addressed, but was there a change management element to the overall plan to help the Maytag employees navigate the takeover and the eventual total shutdown of the Maytag headquarters and manufacturing in Newton, Iowa?
Yes, there was. And in fact, I was involved in that early on. Once this particular initiative started, I had to extricate myself. But yes, there was. And, I know this was difficult and it probably impacted some of you, I'm guessing. We shut down Newton. There's nothing left in Newton, Iowa. And Newton is where Maytag's headquarters were. But we had a team of people that were really focused on the organizational impact. And I was part of that team early on, where in fact, I spent the month of April that year in Cleveland, Tennessee, which was one of the larger manufacturing operations of Maytag, to really help people understand what was going to happen and how it was going to happen and who'd be impacted and that sort of thing. It was there was effort, yes.
Okay. One more here. How did you get through the vendor management / contracting processes in such a short time? Big impact to supply chain if contracts aren't completed.
That's a good question. I'm not sure I understand it completely. If you're talking about If you're talking about like, so I mentioned that this went live on October 28th, and we had a few wrinkles that first week. The wrinkles were Penske. It wasn't Whirlpool, it was Penske. Okay. But hey, I'm not pointing fingers. We were responsible for that. But we probably should have done a little bit more to make sure that Penske, who was our carrier, and we ship a lot of stuff, we should have probably done a little bit more to make sure they were engaged and enrolled. In terms of like outsourcing help, I had at one point I had 20 people on my team, 14 of which were in training. And fortunately, I had partnered with somebody who could deliver those resources very quickly.
Okay.
That's probably the best I can answer that.
Okay.
Let's do one more. And then
Okay, one more. What reporting metrics did you find were most valued?
Reporting metrics.
Yeah, was there something you checked every day to make sure things were going and that would concern you if they were going south? Put it that way.
Well, yeah, that's a great question, and I would point you back at those eye charts that I showed you. Let me just zip back here quickly. These two, we looked at these every day. I looked at the things related to change every day. And actually, I was the guy that ran around to all the functional leads to make sure they were comfortable. So these two charts, especially toward the end of the project, we looked at these every day. All right. Shall we move on?
Yep, go ahead.
We only have a few minutes, and let us start with a poll. So we're going to get into the last segment talking about cross-functional integration. So here's the question. The Harvard Business Review did a study, or reported a study a few years ago that evaluated how many cross-functional teams are dysfunctional. What percent of teams do you think are dysfunctional?
All right, folks, click on polls if you haven't already had your answer here. They're coming through. Buying away the over 40%, 70 to 80%.
Sorry?
Let's see. Votes are coming in. 50 to 60% has 15 votes, while 70 to 80 has now 16.
Okay. Well, let's move on in the interest of time. So the study revealed that 75% of teams are cross-functionally dysfunctional. I also saw another study that I think it was Conference Board did that showed that 83% of executives thought they had silos in their organizations, and that 97% of those executives thought that those silos caused problems. So cross-functional dysfunction is a real issue that we need to address. And we did that in this project. When you don't have that cross-functional view, then you get all of this, right, conflicting priorities and misaligned requirements and lack cooperation, and there's political positioning, right? A lot of that. People in one function don't understand the impact as a result of what's happening in other functions. So very important to address these. And what we did in this particular initiative is we established cross-functional meetings. And incidentally, they were heralded as one of the most important things that we did to drive success. In one of these meetings, we had like 70 people in the room. The project lead from each of the functions, the change agents, the IT staff, and we were really there to collect information relative to communication and training. And to prepare for these meetings, the functions were asked to talk about their projects, the impacts on other areas, and what they needed from each other. So what did order management need from sales, or what did accounts receivable need from order management, that sort of thing. And it was great. I mean, we had a deeper understanding of each of the functions and their interdependencies. We had no cross-functional dysfunction. And we created a list of issues to follow up and resolve. And here's just a quick example. Partial, obviously, but these are the kinds of issues that we surfaced, and we identified action items, owners, and how soon things needed to be resolved, and ultimately the resolution. My team and I were really responsible, along with some consultants, to make sure that these things were addressed. Extremely valuable. The other thing that we did is we had each of the functions describe how their business was going to be different as a result of integrating Maytag. And this is an example from order management, a bit high level, but each of the function leads put these together and presented these in the project integrations team meeting, so that each of the functional heads, vice presidents, could see what was happening in each of the functions and how it might impact them. Another way to mitigate cross-functional dysfunction. So yeah, this was very helpful, and each of the functions did these. Okay, so I mentioned at the end we were also responsible for doing a post-mortem, if you will, post-go live support, and best practices and lessons learned. And this question came up, I think, earlier. The project was #1 priority. If you weren't involved in this, then go on with your day-to-day life. But if you were involved with this, it was #1. That formalized project management structure really made decision making fast. We had really good coordination between business and IS, and you can read the list. I think the lessons learned from an IT perspective, probably should have spent more time cleaning data. The cross-functional meetings that were so great, we probably should have started those earlier, and we needed to develop super users probably more than we did. So those were the lessons that we learned. So my call to action for you today is this. Be sure, #1, be sure you have the right executive project management structure in place. Maybe you don't need something as robust as we had, but then maybe you're not integrating a $4 billion business into yours. But make sure you have the right organization and level of detail, and especially active and visible sponsorship, sponsors that are engaged in project team meetings, that are communicating with the staff. Build a strong change management approach. Right? Employee engagement is so important, because I've said it twice already, that when this is all over and done with, it's the frontline employees that are left to run whatever it is we build. So they have to be involved. And then finally, mitigate that cross-functional dysfunction. Understand what the up and downstream requirements are, and build that risk discovery and mitigation into your plans. With that, we'll take one last swing at questions, and Norm, I have about 1 minute that I need at the end. So
okay. No other questions, but I did have one. I'm always curious about this question. You mentioned on slide 27 the lessons learned. What was actually done with those? In other words, a lot of times lessons learned often equates to lessons observed or lessons documented. But how did Whirlpool use those lessons learned going forward after this project was over? Was any process improved, or was it just filed?
No, that's a great question, and you're right. So often these are like, oh yeah, that was fun. So what we talked about today was the business, the commercial business. What wasn't on the bigger chart was the parts integration, which started like right after this project. And so we also integrated the parts business separately from this project. And I did not lead that, but I was an advisor on that. And I helped the change lead make sure that, for example, she identified her super users earlier in the process. And the cross-functional meeting started right away, not later in the process. So we used those and we folded them back into future initiatives.
Great. Why don't you go ahead and I'm going to post some PDU information in the chat, and you can go ahead and finish up.
Okay. Well, I just want to, again, thank everybody for participating today. I hope you found some value in this.